There are moments in life that stay with people forever. Moments so unexpected, so emotional, that even those trained to stay strong can't hold back tears. Inside one Texas prison, a man convicted of a terrible crime was preparing for the final hours of his life. The guards had seen it all before: the silence, the fear, the regret. But this inmate's final request was unlike anything they had ever heard, and the person he asked for was the last person anyone expected: a female correctional officer. What happened next would leave an entire prison emotionally shaken. The inmate's name was Marcus Reed. For over 18 years, he had lived on death row inside a maximum security prison in Texas. To the public, Marcus was known only through headlines: cold, dangerous, beyond redemption. Most people believed his story ended the day the prison doors closed behind him. But inside the prison, something unusual happened over the years. Marcus rarely caused trouble. He kept to himself, read books constantly, and spent most of his time writing letters no one ever answered. Some guards avoided him entirely. Others said he carried a kind of sadness that never left his eyes. But one officer eventually noticed something different. Officer Elena Ramirez. Unlike many officers, Elena treated inmates with professionalism, but also basic human dignity. She never mocked them, never escalated situations unnecessarily, and never forgot that behind every prison number was still a human being. At first, Marcus barely spoke to her, just short answers, quiet nods, silence. But over time, small conversations began to happen. Conversations about books, about family, about regret. And slowly, a strange trust formed between them. But Elena had no idea that those quiet conversations would one day place her at the center of the most emotional moment of her career. Because one winter morning, everything changed. After years of appeals, Marcus received the official notice. His execution date had been scheduled. The news spread quickly throughout the prison. For most officers, it was simply procedure. Another case, another file, another final countdown. But Elena noticed something unusual. Marcus didn't react with anger. He didn't yell, didn't panic. Instead, he became even quieter. For days, he barely touched his meals. He spent hours staring through the tiny prison window in silence. And then, 3 days before the scheduled execution, Marcus made a request. Not for special food, not for a phone call, not for a priest. He asked to speak with Officer Elena Ramirez, alone. The request immediately raised concern among prison staff. Some officers warned her not to go. You barely know what's going through his head right now. But Elena agreed. And when she finally entered the small visitation room, Marcus looked completely different. Tired, weak, broken. Then he said something that immediately caught her off guard. I need you to help me do one last thing before I go. At first, Elena assumed he wanted help contacting family. Maybe a lawyer, maybe someone from his past. But Marcus slowly shook his head. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Inside was a child's drawing. Old, faded, worn from years of being unfolded and refolded. It showed a little girl holding her father's hand. On the back were the words, "Come home soon, Daddy." Elena's expression changed instantly. Marcus explained that before prison, he had a daughter named Lily. She was only 5 years old the last time he saw her. After his arrest, her mother disappeared with her. For nearly 2 decades, he never knew where they went. Every letter he sent was returned unopened. Every attempt to reconnect failed. And now, with only days left to live, Marcus had one final wish. He wanted his daughter to know that despite everything, he never stopped loving her. The room fell silent. Then he looked directly at Elena. Can you deliver this letter to her? Elena froze. Because prison policy made things complicated, tracking someone down wasn't part of her job. And emotionally, the request carried enormous weight. This wasn't just a letter. It was the final words of a man about to die. But something about the drawing, about the way Marcus held on to it, completely broke her heart. And after a long silence, she quietly answered, I'll try. That promise stayed in Elena's mind constantly. Even after her shifts ended, she couldn't stop thinking about it. A daughter somewhere out there, completely unaware that her father's final hours were approaching. So Elena began searching, using old records, public documents, and information buried in decades-old files. She followed every lead she could. Days passed. Then finally, she found someone connected to Lily's family. And what she learned next left her stunned. Lily was alive, living in another state, and she had spent most of her life believing her father abandoned her willingly. Elena hesitated before making contact. How do you tell someone that the father they never knew only has days left to live? Still, she made the call. At first, Lily refused to believe it. Then Elena mentioned the drawing. There was silence on the phone. Long silence. And then, soft crying. Because Lily still remembered it. Prison officials eventually approved a final supervised visit. No one expected much. After all, they were strangers now. Nearly 20 years separated them. But when Lily entered the visitation room, Marcus immediately began crying. Not the quiet tears of a hardened inmate, but deep, uncontrollable emotion. The kind that comes from years of pain, regret, and lost time. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Lily finally whispered, "Why didn't you come for me?" Marcus could barely answer. Through tears, he explained every failed letter, every attempt to reach her, every moment of regret he carried. And for the first time in decades, someone listened. Even guards monitoring the room struggled to keep composure. Officer Elena stood silently near the doorway, watching the moment unfold. Knowing she almost said no before the visit ended, Marcus handed Lily the faded drawing he had protected for nearly 20 years. Then he said something that nobody in the room would ever forget. "I don't need forgiveness. I just needed you to know. I never stopped loving you." Lily broke down crying, and slowly, she hugged him. For several seconds, the room stood completely still. Even officers later admitted they had never witnessed anything like it. Marcus was executed 2 days later. But inside that prison, people spoke about the moment for years. Not because it erased the past, not because it changed what happened, but because for one brief moment, pain, regret, humanity, and forgiveness all existed in the same room. And Officer Elena Ramirez, the woman who chose compassion over indifference, would later say that moment changed her forever. Because sometimes, a single act of kindness can become the final piece of peace someone carries with them before goodbye. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe people deserve forgiveness at the end of their lives? And if you enjoyed this true life documentary story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories that stay with you long after the video ends. After the emotional final meeting between Marcus and his daughter, most people believed the story was over. The prison returned to silence. The case was closed, and life moved on. But weeks later, Officer Elena Ramirez discovered something hidden among Marcus's personal belongings. A sealed envelope, one that was never supposed to be opened. And what was written inside left even veteran officers emotionally shaken. A few days after the execution, the prison began clearing Marcus Reed's remaining items. There wasn't much. A few books, old photographs, letters, and worn-out notebooks, filled with handwritten thoughts. Most inmates on death row leave behind very little. But while reviewing the belongings, Elena noticed a small envelope tucked inside one of Marcus's books. Across the front were handwritten words, "To be opened only after I'm gone." At first, she assumed it was meant for prison administration. But when she flipped it over, her heart stopped. Written underneath was her name, Officer Elena Ramirez. She stared at it for several seconds. Marcus had never mentioned another letter. And suddenly, a strange feeling settled over her. Part of her didn't want to open it, because after everything that happened, she was still emotionally exhausted. The final meeting with Lily had already changed her deeply. But eventually, alone in her car after work, Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, and from the very first line, she began to cry. The letter read, "If you are reading this, it means my daughter finally knows the truth. And that only happened because of you." Elena covered her mouth as she continued reading. Marcus explained that during his years in prison, he had lost hope many times. But Elena's kindness reminded him that not everyone saw him as a monster. He admitted that for years, he believed he deserved to die forgotten, until someone treated him like a human being again. Then came the part that truly broke her down. Marcus wrote, "You gave me something I thought I lost forever, the chance to be a father one last time." Tears rolled down Elena's face. because in all her years working corrections, no inmate had ever thanked her like that before. But the letter wasn't finished, and what came next would completely shock her. At the bottom of the page, Marcus revealed one final secret. For nearly 20 years, he had been quietly sketching drawings in prison, hundreds of them, mostly memories of Lily as a child. He asked Elena for one last favor, not for himself, but for his daughter. He wanted the drawings delivered to her someday, so she would know that even from a prison cell, he never forgot her face. Elena immediately broke down crying, because suddenly, all those quiet hours Marcus spent alone finally made sense. He wasn't just passing time, he was holding on to the only family he had left. Weeks later, Elena traveled to meet Lily one final time. This time, not as a prison officer, but as someone carrying the final pieces of a father's love. When Lily opened the box of drawings, she froze. Page after page showed memories from her childhood. Her 5th birthday, her favorite stuffed toy, a moment at the park, tiny details only a real father would remember. Lily cried uncontrollably, because for most of her life, she believed her father forgot about her. But the drawings proved something else entirely. He remembered everything. Before Elena left, Lily quietly asked one question. "Do you think he died in peace?" Elena paused, then softly replied, "I think seeing you again was the only peace he ever wanted." Lily began crying again, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Because sometimes, closure doesn't erase pain, but it helps people finally breathe again. Inside prisons, people often only see crimes, sentences, and punishment. But hidden behind steel doors, there are also stories of regret, lost families, and final chances that arrive too late. And sometimes, the smallest act of compassion can change the final chapter of someone's life forever. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Do you believe people can change before the end of their lives? And subscribe for more emotional true life documentary stories that reveal the human side behind unbelievable moments. For months after Marcus Reed's execution, Officer Elena Ramirez tried to move on, but something about the case still haunted her. Not the prison, not the execution, the unanswered questions. Because the more she thought about Marcus's final days, the more one thing stopped making sense. Why had a man who spent nearly 2 decades accepting death suddenly become desperate to reconnect with his daughter? Then one rainy evening, Elena discovered something hidden inside Marcus's old prison notebooks, and what she found would completely change how everyone saw the case. Most of Marcus's belongings had already been archived, but one box remained unclaimed inside the prison records office. Inside were dozens of handwritten journals. Some pages contained sketches, others were filled with thoughts about guilt, regret, and loneliness. But buried deep within one notebook, Elena noticed several pages folded together carefully, as if Marcus intentionally hid them. She slowly unfolded the paper, and immediately, her heartbeat quickened, because written across the top were the words, "What really happened that night?" Elena sat frozen. For years, Marcus had refused detailed interviews. Even during appeals, he rarely defended himself publicly. But now, for the first time, he appeared ready to tell the full story. And what she read next left her speechless. According to Marcus, the night of the crime didn't happen the way the public believed. Years earlier, he had been involved with dangerous people connected to armed robberies across several states. On the night everything went wrong, Marcus claimed he was present during the incident, but insisted he was not the person who pulled the trigger. He admitted his involvement in the robbery itself, but according to the notebook, someone else committed the murder, a man Marcus never exposed. Why? Because shortly after his arrest, threats were made against Lily and her mother. Marcus wrote, "I could survive prison. I could survive dying, but I couldn't survive knowing something happened to my little girl because of me." Elena's hands trembled reading the words. Because if the claims were true, Marcus may have spent nearly 20 years protecting his daughter with his silence. But the next page revealed something even more shocking. Marcus wrote that the second man involved in the crime was never caught and may still be free. Elena didn't know what to do. The case was closed. Marcus was gone. And legally, the system considered the matter finished. But emotionally, she couldn't ignore what she had read. So quietly, without media attention, she contacted a retired investigator who originally worked the case. decades earlier. At first, the investigator dismissed the notebook entirely, until Elena mentioned a specific detail, a detail about the crime scene that was never released publicly. Silence filled the phone call. Then the retired detective said something chilling. Only the people there would have known that. When Elena eventually shared the notebook with Lily, the emotional weight became overwhelming. For hours, Lily sat silently reading every page, sometimes crying, sometimes staring into space. Then finally, she whispered, "So my father died protecting me?" Elena couldn't answer for certain, because too much time had passed. Too many facts were buried in the past. But one thing was undeniable. Marcus chose silence, even when it cost him everything. And suddenly, Lily's entire understanding of her father began to change. Not into a hero, not into an innocent man, but into something far more complicated. A flawed human being who made terrible choices, yet still loved his daughter until his final breath. Several weeks later, Lily visited Marcus's grave for the very first time. The cemetery was quiet, empty, cold. She stood there holding the same faded childhood drawing Marcus protected for nearly 20 years. Then softly, through tears, she finally said the words he never expected to hear. "I forgive you." At that exact moment, Elena, standing quietly nearby, began crying too. Because after years of pain, fear, regret, and silence, peace had finally reached a man who never lived long enough to see it himself. Some stories don't end with certainty. Some endings leave questions that may never be answered. But this story reminded everyone inside that Texas prison of something important. Human beings are rarely just one thing. Sometimes the same person can carry guilt, love, regret, and sacrifice all at once. And sometimes, the final truth only appears after it's already too late. If this emotional story moved you, share your thoughts below. Do you believe Marcus deserved forgiveness? And for more powerful true life documentary stories filled with shocking twists and emotional endings, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.